Lions are known as kings of the jungle. Join us today as we bring you our exclusive journey through the lives of the lions of Moremi. Good morning, igama uZamokuhle Mkhize. Welcome to another special edition of Wild Touch. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Brett Besseling and the Lions of Moremi, but if you are new to the show, here's a brief introduction. Brett Besseling grew up in the Okavango Delta, and in this special program, he tells us all about the Lions of Moremi and how it happened that he spent more than a year of his life with his cats.
The Okavango is quite an interesting place in that it's the biggest inland delta in the world. It covers an area of probably 16,000 square kilometers. It is a big river that basically flows into a desert and never reaches the sea. And most of the water is just lost to the Kalahari sand. And in that process, a lot of the sediment forms these huge banks and turns the sandy area into a paradise. I mean, it's just the most incredible place in the world, really. In 2008, Moremi was nominated as probably the best wildlife area in the world from a tourism perspective. And it seemed like a very obvious place for us to go and be settled and start filming. We moved into an area called Kakanika, and the island and area that we chose to work in was very, very central to the sort of Mboma Island point, a very, very high density game area and sort of a confluence of a lot of territories and passageways for animals to move through. So that was the main factor of choosing our location, really, was the amount of content that we could probably get from that area. The Botswana government was incredibly receptive to our proposition, and obtaining permits was quite quick and quite painless. When you go into a new location and specifically a place that you're quite unfamiliar with, the first thing that you try and do is break down how that particular environment works. Start picking up patterns with the animals that live in that area, work out where the territories are formed, where the boundaries are, what effect the water has on that area, and just try and get an idea of how that whole area sort of works. If you understand the basic functioning of that area, it gives you a window into where your most valuable content would come from. It wasn't even a month since we'd been there that we tapped into the resident lion pride and followed them into quite a thick forest, and there was definitely some rather peculiar behavior sort of playing out, and what it led to is the exposing a fairly new den with very, very young cubs inside that den, and that really was a turning point for us. Moremi was, from that point on, becoming a place of lions for us.
This is one of our first encounters with the lion cubs, filmed in 2008. Brett has since followed the lives of these cubs.
We spend most of the day waiting to get another little glimpse of these cubs. Milk teeth start pushing through when they're about 3 to 4 weeks old, so we can be quite sure that these cubs are between 2 and 3 weeks.
We had gone through a whole string of births and this new life with these lions, and we entered into a totally different stage of their lives where Moremi really takes on a totally different face. The season had changed and everything began to dry out and everything became incredibly difficult for these lions. It was the beginning of a very, very harsh season. The vegetation turned brown and was largely lifeless. The pinnacle of that dry time is the resident herd of buffalo moved out of the lion's territory, and that really changed the whole dynamic of these lions' lives. Buffalo are probably the most popular prey species for lions. It sort of boils down to the amount of energy that is expended versus the return that they would get from that carcass. And buffalo are an ideal prey species using that formula. There aren't the densities of other game in that area to sustain a pride of lions of that size, and lions often become very, very dependent on buffalo in those circumstances, and particularly with a whole new bunch of cubs to feed. This pride of lion was intrinsically locked into a life of dependency on buffalo. When the buffalo left the area and out of the lion's territory, the lions responded by going on these long insurgences into other areas, into other lions' territories in search of the buffalo, and it resulted in quite a lot of conflict. And with very, very young cubs, there ended up being a lot of casualties.
This dry season impacted on all the creatures in the Okavango Delta, even the elephants.
Because it was a particularly harsh season, elephants really started to battle. They started getting pushed out of the dry, and the tail end of that whole migration from the dry to the wet produced quite a lot of elephants that were incredibly dehydrated and malnourished. And the whole area of where the lion's territory was started becoming littered with random herds of elephants. It was just a very unusual circumstance. Well, the stage was set at that point, and we started to witness some really bizarre behavior where the obvious solution to this hard season for these lions was to begin preying on elephant.
Watching lions kill an elephant it's an ugly affair. Lions really battle to strangle an elephant. In fact, they can't really strangle an elephant, so the process is drawn out and the elephant fights for a long time. The last couple of weeks in Moremi have probably been the hardest that I've seen for these lions. They've really been battling to catch big enough prey to sustain the pride. The big herds of buffalo have all gone north, so this pride has really been suffering.
One thing we've seen here on Wild Touch is that nature is about balance and change.
The Okavango is an incredible place because it does go through these transformations. At the end of the heat, the rain returns and the place turns into this dazzling dream of wildlife as if nothing ever really happened.
The continuous rain has really transformed this part of Moremi. Open floodplains turned into big lakes. All the trees, particularly the dead ones, are dark, completely drenched, wet right through. The hippo clearly is one of the animals who doesn't mind the rain. They seem to be moving into these new pools. quite lively and enjoying the expanse of water that they're now given. Impala huddled away on the edges of the forests. Their fur is matted and thick. You can see just how damp they are. Just as the rain lifted slightly, the kukul popped his head out and sat in a branch just trying to dry himself out. The eye of the bird is incredible, so red. Came across these two old buffalo bulls slowly moving together. They must have been disturbed by lions through the night. They were quite wary, very alert and watching, smelling the air. It's just really nice to have a lot of rain in this area. The area really needed this rain, and it's going to transform back to what it was in the previous year.